How did a few drinks and a dare turn into legal papers served in front of everyone I know? I thought proving my husband was replaceable would make me feel powerful, but when the courthouse doors opened and strangers called my name, I realized I had replaced myself out of everything that mattered. I'm Cristal, and I deserve more than what I have at home. My husband Carson thinks quiet patience equals love, but it feels like nothing. I work hard as a marketing coordinator at a tech company downtown. I deserve excitement, attention, someone who actually sees me as more than routine. Tonight I stayed late at the co-working lounge on our office floor. The space was nearly empty by 9, just dim lighting and silence. I told Carson I had a project deadline coming up fast this week. That was only half true, maybe less than half if I'm honest. He texted me around 7 asking if I would be home for dinner. I felt annoyed reading his message like he was checking up on me. I typed back that I was swamped and would grab something later. The lie came easily, almost too easily, but I felt a thrill. I scrolled through social media instead of working on anything important at all. Around 9:15, I packed my bag and finally headed to my car. The parking garage felt cold and empty, my footsteps echoing against concrete. I stopped at a drive-through and ate alone in the car. I took my time driving home listening to music, feeling something close. It was almost 10:40 when I finally pulled into our driveway. The living room light was still on, which meant Carson was awake. I walked in and found him sitting on the sofa waiting. He looked tired, but he smiled when he saw me anyway. He asked if everything was okay at work, his voice soft. I sighed and said I was exhausted, that he wouldn't understand the pressure. He offered to make tea for me, but I waved him off. I just wanted to go upstairs and be alone for a while. He nodded and didn't push, which somehow made me feel even more annoyed. Later that night, I climbed into bed expecting Carson beside me soon, but he never came in, and I didn't bother checking on him. I assumed he fell asleep on the couch watching something boring again. In truth, he was lying awake in the guest room upstairs. I didn't know that yet, didn't know he had started sleeping there. The next morning I woke up alone and went downstairs to the kitchen. Carson was already dressed for work, pouring coffee into 2 separate mugs. One mug sat on the counter near the sink, the other far away. I didn't notice the distance between them, didn't think it meant anything. He asked if I wanted eggs or toast for breakfast this morning. I said I would grab something at work because I was running late. He nodded again, that same quiet nod, and turned back to his coffee. I drove to work feeling lighter, like I had reclaimed something small. I texted my best friend Rachel once I parked in the lot. I complained that Carson was hovering too much, always asking where I was. Rachel sent back a laugh-cry emoji and said I deserved a night out. Her reply felt like permission, like I was right to feel suffocated. I felt validated, like someone finally understood what I was going through. That validation wrapped around me like warmth, and I held on to it. Meanwhile, Carson was at home on his day off that morning. Our daughter Nora was at kindergarten until noon, so the house was quiet. He sat at his desk in the small office we share. His laptop was open to a spreadsheet with columns of dates and times. There were no labels on the columns, just numbers and initials. He added a new row, typing slowly, then paused and stared at it. He heard the front door open and quickly minimized the screen. Nora had come home early with a neighbor who gave her a ride. She ran into the office asking for a snack and a hug. Carson smiled and closed the laptop, focusing entirely on our daughter. But something had shifted in him, something I didn't see yet. That evening I came home again around the usual time, maybe 6. Carson was in the kitchen starting dinner, and Nora was coloring nearby. Everything looked normal on the surface, like nothing had changed at all. But I noticed Carson seemed quieter than usual, more distant somehow. He didn't ask about my day, didn't try to make conversation. I told myself he was probably tired or stressed about work. After dinner, I went upstairs to take a long bath alone. I brought my phone with me and scrolled through messages and posts. I felt restless, like I needed something more than this routine. When I came back downstairs, Carson was putting Nora to bed. I sat on the sofa and waited, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. I thought about texting Rachel again but decided to wait until tomorrow. Carson came down around 8:30 and sat in the chair, not next. He opened a book and started reading without saying a single word. I asked if he was okay and he said he was fine. His tone was flat, emotionless, and it made me feel strangely unsettled. I wanted to ask more but didn't know how to start. Later that night, I went upstairs and got ready for bed again. I expected Carson to follow soon, but he didn't come to bed. I lay there in the dark, wondering where he was tonight. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't really care. But a small part of me felt uneasy, like something was wrong. The next morning, I found Carson already awake and dressed again. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. I walked past and glanced at the screen for just a second. I saw folders labeled with simple names like household and utilities. He closed the laptop quickly when he noticed me looking over. I asked what he was working on so early this morning. He said just finances, nothing important, and asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes and poured myself a cup from the pot. I noticed my phone sitting on the counter where I left it. I picked it up and saw I had a message from Rachel. She was asking if I wanted to go out Friday night. I felt excitement rise in my chest, something to look forward to. I started typing back yes immediately, saying I definitely needed it. Carson glanced over but said nothing, just sipped his coffee in silence. That evening when I got home from work, something felt different. Carson's keys were hanging on a new hook by the front door. I didn't remember us putting a hook there before, but maybe. On the kitchen counter, I saw a thin binder labeled utilities. It looked thicker than it should be for just bills. I thought about opening it but decided not to bother right then. Carson came downstairs carrying a small box of papers toward the garage. I asked what he was doing and he said he was organizing. His phone was in his hand, always close to him now. A reminder flashed on the screen for just a second before disappearing. I couldn't read it fully, but I saw the words meeting and personal. I asked what meeting he had coming up this week soon. He said it was nothing important, just something he needed to handle. His voice was calm, too calm, and it made me feel nervous. I watched him walk into the garage and close the door behind him. I stood there alone in the kitchen, feeling strangely cold inside. Something about his tone, his distance felt different than it ever had. I told myself I was overthinking it, that everything was still fine. But deep down, I felt the first crack forming in the ground. Friday night finally arrived, and I felt alive for the first time. Rachel picked me up around 9 and we drove to the nightclub downtown. The place was loud, crowded, and full of energy that I missed. We found a spot near the bar and ordered drinks right away. The music pounded through the floor and I felt my body relax. This was what I needed, what I had been missing at home. Rachel laughed and said we should make it a fun night. I agreed completely, already feeling lighter than I had in weeks. We danced for a while, just the two of us, letting go. Around 11, Rachel dared me to kiss the next guy who bought me. I laughed and said she was crazy, but the idea thrilled me. She said I needed to live a little to remember what fun felt. A bartender named Dane approached us during his break a few minutes later. He was tall, confident, and had a smile that felt dangerously easy. He offered to buy me a drink and I said yes immediately. Rachel nudged me and mouthed the word dare with a huge grin. I felt my heart race as Dane handed me the drink. He leaned in close and said, "I look too beautiful to be here." I laughed and said maybe I was exactly where I should be. He asked if I wanted to dance and I nodded without hesitation. We moved onto the floor and the music swallowed us completely. He pulled me close, closer than I should have allowed, I knew. But I didn't stop him, didn't pull away, didn't think about Carson. Rachel watched from the side, her smile fading just a little bit. The dare was supposed to be a quick kiss, nothing more. But when Dane leaned in, I let it happen, let it linger. His lips tasted like whiskey and something reckless I couldn't name. People around us cheered and laughed, and I felt powerful and seen. When we finally pulled apart, Dane said I seemed too alive for boring. I asked what he meant, and he said whoever was waiting at home. I laughed and said maybe he was right. Maybe I was too alive. We stayed on the floor dancing for another song, then another. Rachel came over and said we should take a break outside. I followed her to the smoking patio, even though I don't smoke. The cool air hit my face and I felt dizzy with adrenaline. Dane followed us out and leaned against the wall beside me. He asked for my number and I hesitated for only a second. Then I typed it into his phone and told myself it meant nothing. Rachel's expression was hard to read, somewhere between concern and disappointment now. She said maybe we should think about heading home soon, it was late. I checked my phone and saw it was already past midnight. I had 3 missed calls from Carson and 2 text messages. The first text asked if I was okay, the second asked when. I felt annoyed that he was checking up on me again. I typed back that I was fine, just having fun with Rachel. Dane said he had to get back to work but wanted to. I said sure maybe, and watched him walk back inside the club. Rachel looked at me and asked if I knew what I was doing. I said I was just having fun, that it didn't mean anything. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue with me about it. We stayed outside talking for almost another hour, just the 2 of us. I told her how tired I was of feeling invisible at home. She listened, but her responses felt more careful than they used to be. Around 2 in the morning, we finally called a rideshare to take us. I felt exhausted, but also strangely energized, like something had shifted in me. The car dropped Rachel off first, then took me home after that. I stumbled into the house around 2:15 trying to be quiet. The living room was dark, but I saw Carson's shape on the couch. I thought he was asleep, so I tiptoed toward the stairs carefully. But then his voice came from the darkness asking how my night was. I jumped a little and said it was fine, just dancing. He turned on the lamp beside him and I saw his face. He didn't look angry, just tired and sad in a way. He asked what time it was now and I said maybe midnight. He held up his phone showing the time 2:17 in glowing numbers. I said time flies when you're having fun with friends, no big deal. He asked if I danced with anyone tonight at the club. I rolled my eyes and said of course everyone dances at clubs. He stared at me for a long moment without saying anything. Then he asked if I gave anyone my number while I was there. I paused too long before answering, and he noticed the hesitation immediately. I said no and tried to sound casual, but my voice cracked. He nodded slowly and stood up, walking past me toward the stairs. I asked where he was going and he said he was tired. He went upstairs and I heard the guest room door close quietly. I stood alone in the living room feeling strangely guilty and defensive. The next morning I woke up late, around 9 or 10. Carson was already up and moving around downstairs with Nora singing nearby. I got dressed and went down to find them eating breakfast together. Carson barely looked at me when I walked into the kitchen. I poured coffee and sat down, trying to act like everything was normal. Nora asked if I had fun last night with Aunt Rachel. I said yes and kissed her head, avoiding Carson's eyes completely. After breakfast, Carson said he needed to run errands and took Nora. I stayed home alone, scrolling through my phone on the couch. I saw a text from Dane saying he had a great time. I smiled and texted back that I did too, asking when he worked. Around noon, Rachel called and asked if I was okay this morning. I said I was fine, that Carson was being dramatic about nothing. She paused and said, maybe I should think about what I'm doing. I felt defensive and said I wasn't doing anything wrong at all. She sighed and said she just didn't want me to get hurt. I told her I was fine and changed the subject quickly. That afternoon, Carson came home with Nora and groceries for the week. He put everything away in silence, his movements precise and controlled now. I asked if he was mad and he said he wasn't mad, but his tone said otherwise, cold and distant in a new way. On Tuesday, I went to work and told Rachel the whole story. I laughed about the dare and said Carson freaked out over nothing. She listened but didn't laugh with me like she usually would. I said I could replace him in seconds if I really wanted. The words came out louder than I intended, almost a joke. But I saw our manager walking past, and her expression changed suddenly. She glanced at me, then kept walking, but I felt her judgment. Rachel said maybe I should be more careful about what I said. I waved her off and said people needed to lighten up. But the rest of the day, I felt eyes on me. Thursday afternoon, I went to pick Nora up from kindergarten early. I parked in the school pickup line and waited with other parents. Another mother approached my car and tapped on the window lightly. I rolled it down and she smiled, but it wasn't friendly. She said she saw some photos from the club on social media. She asked if everything was okay at home with Carson and me. I felt my face flush hot and said everything was perfectly fine. She nodded slowly and said she just wanted to check in. I thanked her coldly and rolled the window back up immediately. I saw other parents glancing over, whispering to each other in small groups. When Nora came out, I forced a smile and buckled her in. I drove home feeling exposed and angry at the same time. How did people even see those photos, and why did they care? That evening, Carson came home late from work, around 7:30. He looked exhausted and didn't say much during dinner at all. After Nora went to bed, I tried to talk to him. I said people were being nosy and judgmental about nothing at all. He asked what I meant, and I said people saw club photos. He nodded and said his brother Simon had sent him a screenshot. My stomach dropped, and I asked what screenshot exactly, trying to stay calm. Carson pulled out his phone and showed me without saying a word. It was a photo of me and Dane on the dance floor. His arm was around my waist, and we were both laughing hard. The caption read, "Best Friday ever," with a fire emoji next. I felt my throat tighten and said it was just a dance. Carson asked why Dane's arm was around me like that in public. I said it didn't mean anything, that Carson was overreacting completely now. He stood up and walked toward his office without another word. I heard the door close and lock behind him, shutting me out. I sat alone on the couch, feeling defensive and cornered somehow. My phone buzzed with a text from Simon asking if I cared. I didn't reply, just stared at the message until the screen went. That night I couldn't sleep, replaying everything in my head. I told myself I had done nothing wrong, that I deserved it. But a small voice inside whispered that I had crossed a line. I ignored that voice and turned over, forcing my eyes to close. Downstairs, Carson sat at his desk with his laptop glowing softly. He opened a notes app and began typing slowly and carefully. Browser tabs were open, showing storage options and notary locations nearby. He worked for over an hour, then closed everything and sat still. When he finally came upstairs, it was past midnight and silent. He went to the guest room and closed the door again. I heard the lock click and felt something crack deeper this time. Sunday afternoon arrived and Linda invited us for family dinner with her. Carson told me we were expected at 2 and should leave soon. I didn't want to go, but I knew refusing would look worse. We drove in complete silence with Nora singing softly in the back seat. Carson's hands gripped the wheel tightly, but his face stayed calm. I stared out the window, wondering what Linda had said to him. When we arrived, Simon's car was already parked in the driveway ahead. My stomach twisted, knowing he had seen the video and probably judged me. We walked inside and Linda greeted Nora with a warm hug first. She barely looked at me, just nodded and gestured toward the table. Simon and his wife were already sitting, and Pauline, my mother, arrived late. Everyone sat down and the air felt thick with unspoken tension immediately. Linda served food in complete silence, her movements precise and controlled now. I tried to smile and act normal, but no one smiled back. Simon and his wife exchanged glances that made me feel like an outsider. Nora sat between Carson and Linda, chattering happily about her weekend sleepover. I reached for bread and Linda finally spoke, asking how things were. I said everything was fine, that people were overreacting to nothing important. Simon scoffed loudly and I felt my face flush with anger instantly. I snapped that he had no right to judge me whatsoever. He said he had every right when it affected his brother deeply. Carson put a hand on Simon's arm and shook his head slowly. Simon sat back, but his jaw was tight with barely controlled frustration. Linda asked if I understood how my behavior affected this whole family. I said I was just trying to live my life freely. Pauline, my mother, jumped in saying I deserved happiness and fulfillment too. But her voice lacked conviction and she looked embarrassed saying it aloud. Linda turned to her and said, "Happiness doesn't justify cruelty or disrespect." Pauline looked down at her plate and said nothing more after. I felt abandoned even by my own mother in that single moment. Around 2:35, Nora suddenly looked up at me with confusion. She asked why Mommy and Daddy sleep in different rooms now. The table went completely silent and I felt every eye turn. My face went white and I couldn't find any words at all. Carson squeezed Nora's hand gently and said they were figuring things out. Nora asked if we were going to get a divorce someday. My heart nearly stopped and I looked at Carson desperately for help. He said they would talk about it later and asked Nora. She nodded, but her face looked worried and sad in a way. Linda waited until Nora left the table and went to play outside. Then she turned to me with an expression colder than ice itself. She said she had always tried to be fair to everyone involved, but she could not ignore cruelty and disrespect toward her own son. She said if I continued down this path, she would support Carson. I asked support him exactly, my voice shaking with anger. Linda said whatever he decided to do next to protect himself. Pauline weakly said maybe everyone should calm down and talk rationally here. But Linda cut her off and said talking was over now. Simon nodded in agreement and said Carson had shown incredible patience already. Carson sat quietly through it all, watching, listening, saying almost nothing himself. His silence felt louder than anyone's words in that tense moment. I stood up suddenly and said I didn't have to listen. Linda said I was free to leave, but Carson and Nora would. I looked at Carson, waiting for him to defend me or stop. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at his plate with empty. I grabbed my purse and walked out the front door, shaking. I sat in the car waiting for Carson to follow eventually outside. 20 minutes later, he came out carrying Nora's hand gently and carefully. We drove home in silence heavier than anything I had felt before. Nora fell asleep in the back seat, and Carson carried her inside quietly. I went upstairs and tried to process everything that had just happened. Around 9 that evening, I heard movement in the garage downstairs. I went down and found Carson packing documents into his car trunk. Folders labeled home, auto, and bank were stacked neatly inside a box. I asked what he was doing, and he said organizing important things. His phone was in his hand as always now, never far away. A reminder flashed on the screen quickly before he dismissed it immediately. I saw the words meeting and personal and a time 9:45. I demanded to know what meeting he had scheduled for tomorrow morning. He closed the trunk and said it was nothing I needed to do. He walked past me without waiting for a response or argument. I stood alone in the cold garage, feeling completely shut out now. The next morning, Carson woke before dawn and got dressed quietly. I found 2 coffee mugs sitting on opposite counters, neither one touched. His keys hung on a new hook by the door now. A sticky note on the fridge read, "Bring forms Tuesday," in his handwriting. I asked what forms he was talking about, and he said school. But Nora's teacher hadn't mentioned any forms being due this week recently. I watched Carson kiss Nora goodbye and head toward the front door. He didn't look back at me, didn't say goodbye, didn't hesitate. The door closed with a soft final click that echoed through silence. I stood there alone, feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. Something had changed in Carson that I couldn't name or understand fully. He was no longer fighting, no longer asking, no longer caring at all. And that realization terrified me more than anything else ever had before. I tried to tell myself he was being dramatic and cold, but deep down I knew this was something different and final. He had stopped trying to fix us and started planning for after. Wednesday evening, I decided to bring Dane to Nora's school art show. I told myself I was introducing a friend, nothing more than that. Carson said he would meet us there separately after finishing work late. I picked Dane up around 6 and we drove to the community. He asked if I was sure this was a good idea, right? I said it was fine, that I wasn't going to hide anymore. He shrugged and said he trusted me to know what I was. We arrived and walked into the hall where parents were gathering slowly. I spotted Carson sitting in the front row already, alone and waiting. Nora's artwork was displayed on the wall behind him with her name. Other parents turned and stared as Dane and I walked in together. I felt their eyes on us, but I lifted my chin higher. Dane put his hand on my back and I didn't push away. Carson glanced over once, saw us, then turned back to the display. His face showed absolutely nothing, no anger, no sadness, no reaction whatsoever. That emptiness scared me more than yelling ever could have done. Nora ran over when she saw us and headed straight to Carson. She hugged him tightly and showed him her painting with excited pride. She glanced at me and Dane but didn't come over immediately after. I felt a pang of something sharp in my chest watching her. During intermission around 7, a mother approached Carson in the hallway quietly. She asked if there was anything he needed or any help. Carson thanked her kindly and said he was handling everything just fine. The woman glanced at me with something like pity or judgment combined. I turned away, feeling exposed and ashamed in front of all these. After the show ended, Carson walked to his car with Nora's hand. I tried to approach and said Nora should come home with me. Carson said calmly that Nora would stay with him tonight, as arranged. I protested and said we hadn't arranged anything at all between us. He repeated, even more calmly, that it was already decided and done. I had no response because his tone left no room for argument. He buckled Nora into his car and drove away without another word. Dane and I stood in the parking lot, and the silence fell. He said things seemed really complicated, and maybe he should step back. I felt panic rising and said it wasn't complicated, just temporary tension. He didn't look convinced and said he would text me later soon. I drove home alone, feeling everything slipping through my fingers like sand. That night, Dane texted saying he thought things were too messy now. He said he couldn't be involved in this kind of drama. I typed back defensively, but he didn't reply to any messages. Rachel still wasn't answering my calls or responding to my texts either. I sat on the couch alone, realizing I had pushed everyone away. The next morning, I went downstairs and found Carson at the table. His laptop was open, showing a desktop file tree I didn't recognize. Folders labeled Archive Household, Archive School, Archive Accounts were visible on screen. I asked what he was doing and he said organizing for taxes. I didn't believe him, but I didn't know what to say. He closed the laptop when I stepped closer and stood up calmly. Later that afternoon, Carson was at his office at work downtown. He closed his door and made a phone call in low tones. A co-worker walking past noticed his serious expression but didn't interrupt him. Carson spoke quietly, using words like timeline, documentation, and next steps carefully. He stayed on the call for nearly 30 minutes, taking notes. When he hung up, his face was calm but his jaw was tight. He saved a document, backed it up, then locked his computer screen. That evening he came home and asked to talk with me. We sat in the living room and his voice was steady. He said he would not argue anymore, that it was pointless. He said he would handle everything properly from now on without drama. I asked what that meant exactly, and he said I would understand. He stood and walked to his office, locking the door firmly behind. I heard a faint beep like a recording app stopping suddenly inside. Later, I saw a USB stick on his desk, labeled with today's. I tried to open it on my laptop, but it required a password. A cloud sync notification flashed on Carson's phone for just 1 second. It read file uploaded successfully before disappearing from the screen quickly again. The next morning, his phone alarm went off labeled Paper Drop 8. He dismissed it fast and I asked where he was going. He said he had an errand before work, nothing important really. He left carrying a thin folder under his arm with purpose. I watched from the window as he drove away, car facing. The house felt emptier than it ever had in all our years. Rachel texted saying she couldn't cover for me anymore, that I needed. I started typing a defensive reply but deleted it halfway through typing. For the first time, I felt completely and utterly alone here. No friends, no support, no one believing my side of anything. Carson had stopped fighting and started planning something I couldn't see yet. His calmness felt like a warning I didn't know how to read. He no longer promised to work on things or fix our marriage. He spoke only in logistics now, schedules, pickups, bills, separate everything always. His phone stayed close to him always, charged and face down nearby. His documents were organized into neat stacks I wasn't allowed near. His expressions stayed blank no matter what I said to provoke him. He had emotionally detached completely, and I felt the ground disappearing fast. That night I tried to sleep, but I kept replaying everything. The toast, the video, the family dinner, Nora's question, Linda's ultimatum, Carson's calm voice saying he would handle things properly echoed in memory. I realized too late that his silence wasn't weakness or surrender. It was preparation for something I couldn't stop or control anymore now. I had underestimated him completely, mistaking patience for weakness the entire time. And now I was standing on the edge of something. I closed my eyes and tried to pretend everything would still. But deep down, I knew the end was already coming fast. I walked out of the office and into the parking garage. My car sat alone in the corner under flickering fluorescent lights. I sat in the driver's seat holding the papers on my lap. The custody schedule showed Carson getting Nora 5 days every single week. I would see my daughter only twice weekly under someone's watchful supervision. The reality of what I had lost finally hit me completely. I had thrown away my marriage for excitement that lasted mere weeks. Dane was gone. Rachel wouldn't speak to me. My family was ashamed. Carson had quietly gathered evidence while I laughed and danced recklessly. Every text, every photo, every public moment had been documented carefully. The toast, the club, the school event, all of it recorded. I thought his silence meant he had given up on us. Instead, he was protecting himself and our daughter from me completely. I started the car but didn't know where to drive anymore. Home wasn't mine for much longer. Work felt hostile and dangerous. I had nowhere left to go and no one to turn to. The hearing date stared back at me from the top page. In 2 weeks, I would face a judge with no defense. I had humiliated Carson publicly, neglected my daughter, and destroyed my own family. And now I would lose everything because I wanted to feel. I thought I could replace my husband in seconds with a stranger. But in the end, they both replaced me and walked away.